Hi, I'm Jeremiah. Welcome to Up at Night. This podcast is all about learning from thought leaders, academics, and professionals based on one fundamental question. What keeps you up at night? Welcome to Up at Night. I am thrilled to be joined today by Cynthia Iorio. Cynthia started her career as a project management specialist, I would say. With 20 years of experience, I think she's probably one of the greatest of all time in Canada. And what I found surprising and very interesting is that Cynthia pivoted her career and started her entrepreneurial journey all around caregiving. And she's now a care consultant. She also has a podcast. She's a transformation coach. So a lot to talk about. Thank you so much for joining me today, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremiah. And I just want to say, I know I told you this in the pre-recording, but I listened to a couple of episodes to prepare and find out a little bit about who you are and how you question people. And I found myself enthralled by the way you ask questions, the types of conversations you have, and I binged every single episode you have. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
I really do appreciate that. And I hope the audience will like it as much as I do. So I want to start by going through your career, because 20 years in project management, you're usually the person that have to deal with a lot of pressure, that have all departments pushing you to get deliverable done. You've worked in very competitive and complex industries such as aerospace. So please tell me a bit about yourself and how did you get up to like that? Because you did it for 20 years, right?
I did, yeah. So, I grew up in Montreal in the West Island to a typical Italian family. My parents wanted a lot for me. They wanted to make sure I went to school and got my education. And so throughout the majority of my childhood, I knew I was always building towards a career of some sort. So I got a degree in marketing actually initially, and I went to go work for a company called Future Electronics, which is here in the West Island. And that's a company that introduced me to, it's electronic component distribution, but it introduced me to different areas of the business. It was very structured. There was a structured and finance department, a marketing department, sales. It was really structured, and it introduced me into the value of leading projects and programs, whatever it was that was on my plate at the time. After about 5 years of being in business and doing that, I kind of said to myself, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? It was the beginning, I think, of an entrepreneurial spirit of that question of, who I want to be, what do I want to do? So I went back to school and I ultimately got a degree in journalism, and I went to go work for a few months, I would say. It wasn't very long, but I went to work for a few months at CBC. I was in London, England for a bit. I was in Toronto. And one of the things that I fell in love with in journalism was production. So it wasn't the in front of the camera, it was the behind the camera. It was seeing how all the different elements of story kind of comes together, and how there are various different ways of looking at problems, looking at situations that are facing the world today. And while journalism is a really competitive space, for some reason, it just didn't fit in my heart. I had the business experience. Now I have the journalism experience. And what I ultimately did is I married my skills that I acquired in communications, in journalism, with my business skills in marketing. And I found myself heading towards a career in project and program management. And that set off such a thrilling, exciting ride, working initially in IT for a professional services department. And then I went to go work in aerospace. And, project and program management is very much like production in that you have all different inputs. And you have all different various competing objectives. You have different personalities. And the thing also that I liked was that I wasn't a people manager, I was a project manager, which meant that my people were resources, that there were going to be obstacles, and it was my responsibility to kind of see the whole picture. So as I worked my way through project management in aerospace, so ultimately I had to take a leave of absence when I was in aerospace. And that's what I'm trying to get to. It wasn't actually that at all. It was it was demands of my family. It was the first time.
So that was that pivotal moment.
It was a pivotal moment. Yeah. So, and I know we'll probably get into that, but I'll just kind of finish with my project and program management experience. Ultimately, I graduated to program management and I went to go work for an IT company that was ultimately bought out by Microsoft. And again, just loved seeing everything coming together and helping customers achieve their objectives with the solutions we had to offer.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, life is probably it's full of surprise and always manage to throw us a curveball. And sometimes it's pretty significant. In your case, it has to do with your parents, I think. And I would like to know, because you were pretty much going through that perfect corporate ladder, getting skills, being good at it, getting experience, and then this happened. And this shook everything. That specific moment in life seems to have been something quite significant. So if you don't mind, can you walk us through that mindset that shifted and had such a massive impact on your career that it ended up making who you are today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, and like you said, as I was climbing that ladder and going through the different experiences, I had found myself at 34 years old, no children, not married, and living in old Montreal, just kind of this beautiful life. And on a Monday, my mother called me and asked me to accompany her to a doctor's appointment that was a follow up with her oncologist. She had had stage 2 cancer 2 years prior, and this was just routine. And so I thought nothing of it. But what we learned 5 days later, also, just as a side note, be careful if a doctor asks you for an appointment at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. It's not
Mm,
going to be necessarily great news.
mm.
But we sat in the room and the doctor told my mother that her cancer had come back. It was metastatic. And when she pressed him for a life expectancy, he told her she had 6 to 12 months to live. And in that moment, it, I mean, you don't really know how you're ever going to react in moments like that. I felt like I left my body and I was watching what was happening in the room. And I didn't break down. There was no crying. I looked at my mother and from her neck up, she was very stoic. She was receiving the information, and from the neck down, she was kind of shaking and nervous. And the thing that I remember about that moment the most is that in my gut, I said to myself, we actually have an opportunity here. In a weird, crazy project management, goal-oriented way, we have a destination. And we've
Mm.
been given a chance to make the rest of the life that my mom has here on earth the best it could possibly be. And so I said to her, I said, Mom, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to leave the place where I'm living right now. I'm going to come home and I'm going to move in with you and we'll figure this out. And that was the pivot. It was stronger than me. It was bigger than me. And so I moved home 2.5 months later.
Wow. That's incredible. And as entrepreneur, our definition of success, in my opinion, or from people I interviewed or I talked to, is rarely about enjoying it. It's about what comes next. It's rarely about looking what we've accomplished or how many people we've helped. Even though we love that, it's okay. We did it. What's next? And at 34, 34-year-old to have to face this reality that life is finite, and that's what makes it so precious. Must be one shocking and definitely something that will change your perspective on what technically success could be.
100%. Yeah. And I was completely naive. That's the other thing is I jumped into that role. The first season of my podcast that I have is called Lead with Love. And I
Mm.
say that fire that I had in the belly of my stomach to say I'm going to move home was love, but also naivete. And within the first, 3 months or so, my mom was still physically well. She looked physically well. So I was accompanying her on her appointments and her journey in that sense. But about 3 months in, she ended up having to be hospitalized. Her lungs had filled with water. And it was at that moment that I would say, I realized I have to leave work.
Yeah.
She can't do this on her own anymore. And it actually was one foot in front of the other. And just, being kind of in the thick of it, the demands of now needing to be this project and program manager at a very critical, uncertain time. But the reflection backwards after everything happened, my mom ultimately ended up passing away in April 2016, about 11 months later. And it was only in the reflection afterwards that I felt a deep sense of pride with what I had accomplished with her, where I was able to take and extract those lessons that I had from the caregiving experience. But when you're in it, like it crushed me. It absolutely crushed me. But there was so much value to the suffering.
Could you tell us at that moment, or there was probably a longer reflection, what your life mission or your true life's mission became from what it was when you were focused on your career?
I mean, I don't think that I had a life mission. I think it was easy for me to focus on a career beforehand because I think up until that point, I had certain expectations of what my life was supposed to be. I was supposed to go to school and go to university. I was supposed to get a good job. I was supposed to get married and have kids, and that was something that didn't ultimately happen. And so what was the next thing for me to focus on was the career, but I was going through the motions of living the life that I thought that I had to live. And in terms of a mission for my life afterwards, after everything that I had ever known had been ripped from me, I mean, the relationship with my mom was one that was so close. I had to just learn how to rebuild the relationship with myself. And there were some really strong lessons that came out of that caregiving experience. And one of them was that, like, your presence is the most important thing that you can give someone. It's the most important gift you can give someone. And your presence with yourself is one. And so learning that I had to repair the relationship with myself became something that is informing my ultimate mission, which is to be of service. And that was something else that I learned, is that we as human beings are at our best when we are of service.
That's incredible. I often tell people our life is a little bit like a table or a chair. And there's, in my opinion, 4 pillars that we have to keep track of. And if one of them has to be repaired or reworked, it's okay. But if 2 or 3 are affected, it's usually very hard. And you build a career through that. These 4 pillars I'm referring to are often what I call yourself, right? So your health, your mental states. Then the other one would be your financial situation. Another significant one is friends and family. And the last one is your work life. And in your case, from my understanding, is you had to make very hard decision because your family got affected and it affected you pretty hard. And then because of that, you decided to create a lot of instability, taking the leap to go into entrepreneurship, probably affecting also your financial stability. How did you build a business jumping head on into so much challenges?
Well, I think that the parallels between caregiving and entrepreneurship are far greater than you would even think. I mean, you're treading in uncharted territory. You're trying to, you said your 4 pillars were family and business and yourself, and your network of people around you. This is caregiving. This is what it is. So from a financial perspective, yeah, I'll be honest with you. I've been working for the last couple of years to really build myself in a position to be able to take some time off. But the goal was always to ultimately end up being of service. So, I gave myself kind of a bandwidth for that. But I can't plan for sure how the next 18 months are going to go. I don't know what that's going to actually look like. So along with this preparation of jumping and diving into entrepreneurship, and preparing financially, I've also been preparing myself. And I've been working on that relationship with myself and my physical wellness and doing a lot of practices to, make sure that I'm keeping myself most healthy and making healthy choices. And I think, I heard on one of the podcasts, one of your guests saying like, your mindset is the greatest asset in any uncertain journey. And that is something that, you have to work on. I had to learn how to work on in the caregiving space, but I've also been working on now. So there's been the financial preparation. There's also the network that I've been building, talking to other entrepreneurs, learning. And the other thing that I really ultimately learned as well in my life, and I did the caregiving for my mother, and then ultimately was thrown into that role again for my father when he suddenly was diagnosed with a disease called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and in 2022 was given 3 to 4 months to live, and ultimately passed away in 4 weeks. And I was thrown into that caregiver responsibility again. But you can make as many decisions as you want, and you can put as many plans in place as you want, which are necessary, but you control nothing.
Yeah.
And so in this building over the course of the last year, having lost my parents, having had to figure out and, reparent myself to a certain degree, I ultimately have come to the place where it's like, no, I'm going to go all in on me. I've put all of the things in place. Why not take a chance now? Why not be somebody who, puts everything behind herself so that she can help others? And so, yeah, I don't know I give myself 18 months. I don't know what these next 18 months are going to look like. But, my formula, you have your 4 pillars. I have a formula for success that is where preparation meets resilience.
Yeah.
And I define resilience by awareness, by acceptance of where you are, by your ability to play and to be curious, and the people that surround yourself with. And then the rest, you let life's magic happen.
And you're so right. That's one common trait that any entrepreneur need to make sure they have. That's resilience. Because, it's a roller coaster. The high is going to be high, the low is going to be low.
And that's what it was in caregiving. I mean, going through the journey of like having this test done and, oh, your markers look good, so we're in a good place. And then, okay, that's great. And then all of a sudden your oxygen levels are low. So you have to pivot, you have to talk to these people, you have to do, and it's just this high and low and high and low. At an emotional deficit on top of that. Right? Like I wasn't building anything with my mom. I wasn't building anything with my dad. I wasn't creating. We were just the thing we were trying to create was a quality of life. So yeah, now I get to go through those highs and lows with, as you had said earlier, the ultimate goal, the ultimate objective being, this great product and service that I can offer others.
People often think by reading a lot of books, by being educated, we get to figure out entrepreneurship better than other. I found that a good way of lying to ourselves because 70% of the book we read are written by non-entrepreneurs because they wouldn't have time to write the book anyway. But to go back to your point, what would be the most significant experience you've had throughout this very hard journey that really solidified that mission? You're definitely purpose-driven and you're very resilient. What would be the fuel or the elements that really allowed you to pursue that and that to build upon that resilience that I think a lot of people could learn from?
I think in repairing the relationship that I had with myself, and I say that because that was in a journey that, being thrown into your home during COVID. I was a single mom at the time with my daughter, and I had a lot of time on my hands. So that repairing, that figuring, that discovering who I was, I came to the point where I was like, who am I not to do this? It is my right, my responsibility. I am here on this earth. Our time is indeed finite. Who am I not to bring my gifts and do these things? This is not a dress rehearsal. We get one life. And people, if you ever hear about other people talking about grief or talking about being on their deathbed, nobody is there on their deathbed talking about regretting the things that they did. They're regretting the things they didn't do. And I think when I look back and I say, okay, I left my first job that was very cushy and very secure after 5 years, that job at Future Electronics, and I left to go work in journalism, what I thought was going to be my passion. That was the first experience that I had in saying, like, no, this is just one life. I'm going to go pursue that. Did it turn out the way I thought it was going to turn out? No, I didn't end up in a newsroom, but it didn't turn out badly either. And so life happens for you when the things that you expect you want don't happen. And there's so much. Our brain thinks that we can control. Our brain thinks we can see into the future. But there's so much that life has to offer that I can't even think about. So who am I not to go try and figure that out?
I also think as a society, compared to other culture and society, we're pretty ill-equipped to deal with death in general. It's almost still, as evolved as we are as a society, a taboo almost. Something, we shove into specific centers and we don't know
Don't
how
talk
to
about
handle
it.
it. I probably don't even know how to handle it,
Yeah.
Now that we're having this conversation, I didn't have to deal with it at a very personal level yet. But at the end of the day, we know we'll have to deal with it. What would be, you think, a way to start on that journey? Because you went through this, and as much as we're telling ourselves, it's not me today, but yeah, it might be me tomorrow. Um, what would be a piece of advice you would give to people listening to this podcast right now?
I mean, that's a really loaded question. And I'll say because our relationship to death is really informed a lot by our cultural beliefs, by the way our families have conditioned us to think about it. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and she was saying, the nerd in me doesn't like the semantic of the term unexpected death, because we're all going to die,
That's one
right?
thing for sure. Yeah.
Death and taxes.
Yeah.
And I'll add change to that, because there's a sure thing too that always happens, which is change. But preparing for something like that, it's a very personal journey. And I would say there's no real way to prepare. You can't
You
prepare.
deal with it when it happens. And you
And
deal
every death and every relationship informs how you feel about death as well, right? But just accepting that it's going to be there,
is
you know,
already, yeah.
is already a big step. I do want to say that a thought that just popped up into my head, though, talking about, again, preparation, talking about, planning and all of that, is that one of the ways that we can deal with our feelings about death is to deal with our feelings about wellness and life and taking care of ourselves, right? When you live an authentic life, when you take care of yourself and you do things to make sure that you are continuously checking in with yourself to be as well as you can, if death were to come, you're kind of preparing for that next inevitable, knowing that you've done everything that you can. And it helps to mitigate the mental turmoil that can come with it.
You know what? A lot of entrepreneurs make fancy business plan, goal they want to achieve, specific milestone they want to achieve. They get to learn to be a little bit of a project manager. But one thing I started doing recently, and I would like to have your opinion on that, is what about applying something to that to have certain life goals? What is my definition of personal success outside of the business? Because, I'm fulfilled. I'm happy when, I hear from someone that it's the best matches they've had, or I see my team, growing and evolving. I love it. But then ultimately it's, okay, this business in 2-3 generation, I would love if it's still up and running, but the odds are quite small. Just like, Xerox and Toshiba and some car company that everybody knows today will not be known in a couple of generations from now.
Right.
So we have to be a bit more selfish, I think, about ourselves. And I would like to know how you treat that business goals and that drive to look for the next step. But then how did you apply that going through what you went at a personal level?
I mean, it's a really great question. Um, I think y you only know what you know today. And you can only hope for the future based on the information you have today. And I think that, you speak about plans and stuff like that. I'm pulling this up right now. I sat myself in my office last week for 2 days and I storyboarded and I mapped out but the most important activity that came from those 2 days of really the planning and the doing was where I started, which is understanding what is my motto,
Mm.
what is my mission, what is my vision, and what are my core beliefs. And when you continuously check in with yourself on those things, those are the things that drive you in business and in life and help to keep you on the path of whether or not you find the next thing or whether or not this thing you've been doing has been working or continues to work for you. So again, I'm going to say it really comes back to knowing who you are and
Yeah.
and what drives you.
Working on ourselves.
Yeah.
That seems to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious, we always have something. Our mind is great, but I call it this hamster, the one that never stops. What keeps you up at night now that you've been through a lot, you have an extensive experience, a lot of project management experience, which in my opinion is one of the skill set that is by far one that is the greatest assets when you want to scale a business and you have to deal with people. What keeps you up at night?
So look, my business is now going to be dedicated to helping employers support their employees who will become caregivers. And one of the things that I really realized about my experience in caregiving is that it actually was an asset and it wasn't a liability.
Mm.
And the way we talk about caregiving today is in a liability perspective, something we don't want to be doing. One of the reasons why I had such success in both of those times that I had to do it was because I had employers who supported me, but they are very rare.
True.
And so my goal and my mission with everything that I'm doing in entrepreneurship is to help empower employers to see their employees as assets, those who are juggling this, invest in them, and ultimately reap the benefits that when they invest in these types of employees, that they're going to get back from their working caregiver demographic. Because this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
When? Yeah.
Right now, 1 in 4 Canadians is a caregiver, and by 2031, it's projected 1 in 2. Right now, there are 59 million caregivers in the States, 60% of which are working.
You're right. I mean, we have an aging population. It's not gonna, yeah.
So what keeps me up at night is that I truly believe that we are on the cusp of an economic crisis of epic proportions that is caused by a healthcare system that is struggling and being propped up by informal caregivers. And there are very real, tangible things that employers could and should be doing that they're not doing. So that keeps me up at night because people need the support, but they also need to realize that this is not something they need to run away from. This is a beautiful, incredible experience that on the other side of it could make them better in life and in business.
That's such a strong mission, because you're so right. Statistically, we are in an aging demographic country. Without immigration, it would be a no man's land. So, and I wonder if it was possible to add, or maybe you have some stats about that. What is the decrease of productivity from an employee who just learned that? And how
Yeah.
do we help them to go through that better, faster if possible, to how do we accompany them? Like, because if I'm putting myself in this shoe and I have an employee that goes through that, I know for sure that employee will have something in his head that will make him less productive. And that is totally normal. But how do I deal with that? I have absolutely no idea.
Right now, informal caregivers give about 57.1 billion hours of unpaid care per year, equivalent to $97.1 billion of effort. For every 1 hour that somebody spends in a hospital is 3 hours of informal caregiving. It's absolutely insane. And I, the lost productivity statistics, I don't have them here. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's $5.1 billion in lost productivity, if I'm not mistaken, and I can confirm that for you, a year.
That's
And as an
incredible.
employer, right now, the conversation around caregiving is dominated and has been dominated by the healthcare field and has been dominated by the government. And the way that they talk about caregiving has been really to focus on the aging population. And a lot of the images, like I'm just going to say it, caregiving has a public relations problem. Like I didn't call myself a caregiver when I was 34 years old. I wasn't taking care of my mother who was old. My mother was 57. She would have killed me if I told her, that she was old or someone to refer to her as old, right?
And I have some Italian friend. You guys are also, yeah, when it comes to family and
Yeah.
there's a stereotype. It's a stereotype. I'm okay with that. But often it proves to be somehow closer to reality than not.
Yeah. So all of this to say that talking about caregiving is not something that comes normally. It's not something that comes naturally. But a lot of people do it. They don't even realize that they're actually doing it. So as an employer, even just to ask the question. So, a lot of the pressures that are on people who are juggling these things, these responsibilities of life and business and caregiving, they are more apt to suffer from burnout and depression. But
Really?
just an employer asking the question has been proven to reduce the risk of burnout and depression by 20%. Just acknowledge me.
Education.
That's it. But just even to be seen, like we as human beings, we have a very core need to just be seen and acknowledged, not to be ignored. So that would be a very first step. The other thing is that I, as a professional, never identified it, like I was saying earlier, as a caregiver. And so all of the statistics that we have on caregiving, you can't really trust it, especially in the workforce, because I was a professional. I am a professional. I'm not a caregiver first. So I'm not checking off the caregiver box. But I bet you that there are people in the organization right now, more people than you even know, who are juggling and balancing these responsibilities. And it's not just aging. It's not caring for only aging parents. It's caring for people with, acute illnesses. It's caring for children with disabilities and other types of disorders. So really, as an employer, the first place to start is to just ask the question, not from a perspective of planning, just curiosity. And then, my goal, my focus is to say, okay, there are very real transferable skills that we can invest in you to help you manage your care at home, but also do the stuff here at work, like investing in leadership training. Family caregivers have to be advocates. Family caregivers have to be, take care of schedules. They have to take care of finance. They have to take care. It's the same thing as entrepreneurs. They're basically being thrown into a business type situation without any support. Well, imagine having that person be back in your business after they've just run that project, that program, and now they come back and they have all of this ability to live in uncertainty, work in uncertainty, manage different stakeholders and their different demands and their needs. I mean,
There's a value to it. Yeah.
there is a super huge value. And, then there's the typical flexible work hours and, financial supports and benefits and all of that. But really it starts with, I believe, middle managers and executives just asking the question, hey, who's caring? And then, everything can snowball from there.
any last word maybe you would like to tell the audience? Because there is, and if not, like you said, if it's when, going to be people listening to this who see themselves in this situation. What would you tell them?
Buckle up, buttercup. No. No. I would, in all seriousness, I would say the more preparation you can have right now in having some of maybe the more uncomfortable questions about what people want for their own personal care and their own personal needs going forward. Should I get sick? What is that going to look like? Having the courage to ask those questions is key, and understanding that that's not a one and done conversation to have. And if talking to somebody else about it and asking them, like if you're a child and you're speaking to your parents and you're not comfortable asking your parent, start with yourself. Ask yourself that question. What do you want? Should something happen, who would you want to care for you? How would you want them to care for you? Do you know who you would call in case of an emergency? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses and your blind spots? And who can you rely on in that case? Prepare mentally in that time so that, God forbid, something should happen. I mean, yes, we said it. We're all going to get there someday. We don't know when. So be as prepared as you can for when that does happen, and allow yourself the flexibility and the grace to navigate that time as best as you can.
Cynthia, thank you so much for these great insights, both from an entrepreneur standpoint, but also from a vulnerability and very personal standpoint. I really do appreciate that. People can follow you on social media at Cynthia Iorio. I think you also have your website, cynthiaiorio.com. And last but not least, your podcast, which I think is called Love, Transform, Evolve, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing.
That's great.
Thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to continue that conversation. Thank you so much for being part of the Up at Night family. If you've liked what you heard today, don't forget to rate, follow, subscribe, or leave me a comment below. New episodes of Up at Night drop every week. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode. I'm Jeremiah Caregivers. Until next time.